During E3 this year, like every other year, all I wanted was a new Metroid game. It has been way too long between game entries, with a 10-year gap since the last Metroid Prime game, and a 13-year gap since the last 2D Metroid style game. As Nintendo's E3 presentation began, I watched and waited like so many other people for Nintendo to announce a Metroid Switch title, and that is exactly what we got. It may have only been a video of a title screen, but it was so much more than that. It was the reassurance to the fans that Nintendo is listening to us, the Metroid fans out there. It also helped that Nintendo pulled a Billy Mays by not just announcing one Metroid game, but also announcing Metroid Samus Returns for the 3DS, which was slated to be released later this year. I, for one, couldn't wait to get my hands on this 3DS remake of Metroid 2, Return of Samus. And now that it's finally here, let's see if the Nintendo hype train really has no brakes. Metroid Samus Returns isn't an exact remake of Metroid 2, but it still has the same story as Metroid 2. With the threat seen on planet Zebes during the first game, Samus is sent back to the Metroid's home planet of SR-388 to exterminate all of the Metroids. There are 40 Metroid bosses that you have to find and kill, and that's the main objective of both games. This is really all that the game has in common with Metroid 2, and that isn't a bad thing. When Nintendo announced Metroid Samus Returns, I didn't see it as a remake of Metroid 2. It still was a remake of the second entry, but what I saw was a return to form for a series lying dormant for way longer than it should have. I'm just finally glad to see that Nintendo decided to put out a Metroid game on the 3DS. With 4 Zelda games, 8 Pokemon games, and 4 Fire Emblem games, it's finally good to see a Metroid game come to the 3DS. I mean, just look at this beautiful box art. Nintendo sure knows how to... Sorry about that. I don't know how that got there. Now let's get down to the gameplay. Metroid Samus Returns controls just like the other 2D Metroid games, with a lot of the series staple items returning, like the Morph Ball and the Ice Beam. But what's different about this installment is the introduction of 360 aiming and a melee counterattack. With the precision accuracy of aiming in this game, it adds an entirely new dimension to the 2D formula. With the freeing feeling of free-range motion, you can now blast any enemy from any direction. There is a downside to this ability though. It gives you complete control over Samus's arm cannon, but at the cost of losing the ability of movement while you are firing freely. This would be cumbersome without the addition of a melee counterattack that Samus now has at her disposal. If an enemy attempts to strike you, you can now fight back with a perfectly timed melee attack that will stop almost any enemy in its tracks. To me, this is by far the greatest addition to this game, and a much needed one. Both of these added features are mechanics that I hope stick around for the Metroid series, and are hopefully put into use in other Metroidvania style games. They feel so much like the gameplay mechanic introduced in Breath of the Wild, where you could climb anything. It's a small feature that adds so much more to the game, and I wish I could go back and play all the other past games with these mechanics added. Samus also has a new set of abilities called Aeon abilities readily available at her disposal. There are 4 different abilities you can unlock, but I will only be covering the first 2 abilities since you receive them so early on in the game. The first of these 2 abilities is the Scan Pulse, which allows you to scan a small area of the map to reveal that portion of the map. This was implemented perfectly because if you didn't want to use an ability to fill in the entire map for you, then you could just go out and fill in the map yourself without any aid from the game. A lot of people I've talked to about this ability have said that they were really happy to finally get a chance to explore a map that doesn't show you where everything is right off the bat. The first 2 Metroid games don't give you a map at all, and in my opinion, that's what makes them the hardest to go back to. In the past 2D Metroid titles, they have either given you a map immediately, or you go into a room that fills in the entire map for you. Now you can do all the exploring you want, and fill in the map at your own pace. One extra feature that this ability provides is that it also reveals where bombable blocks are to reveal either secrets or the way forward. It was a great way of changing the map system without having to reinvent the wheel. The second Aeon ability you unlock is called Lightning Armor, which when it is activated, any hit of damage you take is taken from your available Aeon gauge instead of your health bar. This ability is used for getting through sections that require you to venture through this plant that damages you on contact. The most useful application I found for it was to activate it during a Metroid battle. Since the Metroids are merciless and take away almost an entire energy tank when it strikes you, it is very convenient to know that you have a backup ability just in case you need to use it. This game wasn't perfect, but it was exactly what I could have hoped for. The only downsides to it were the difficulty and the 3DS itself. It's not so much that the game was too difficult, but that it was very stingy on the amount of energy you receive from defeating enemies. I found myself farming for energy before fighting a Metroid with the little creatures that came down from the ceiling. I didn't want to die and restart from the last save station, so I would stand there shooting the enemies until my energy was full. This took me out of the game experience because I had to do something menial in order to progress further in the game. The only other complaint I had was that my hands got uncomfortable after long play periods on both the 3DS and the 3DS XL. For some reason the control layout really cramped my hands if I played for more than an hour. These are just minor complaints though, and they don't take much away from the experience you get from returning to controlling Samus once again. After playing through Metroid Samus Returns, I can proudly say that Samus is back and hopefully here to stay. I'm so glad that Nintendo has gone back to exactly what they do best, which is creating beautiful games that can be enjoyed by almost anyone. With this small taste of Metroid to hold us over before they unleash Metroid Prime 4 on the Switch, I hope that Nintendo brings back some of the older franchises that haven't seen a release in over a decade. Since Nintendo has a very successful console out right now, and they have such a massive lineup of games coming out in 2017, it gives us Nintendo fans some hope to get the games we've always wanted, and some we didn't even know we wanted. With all that said, I would give Metroid Samus Returns an 8 out of 10. The 2D style of Metroid is back, and the experience you get from stepping back onto the Metroid home planet of SR388 is one of the best the 3DS has to offer. This game isn't perfect, but if you have enjoyed any Metroidvania style game in the past 5 years, I would strongly recommend playing this game. You will not regret it. Now all we have to do is wait patiently for Metroid Prime 4 to be released before we can jump back into the spectacular world once again. This is JoystickDrummer, and I am all drummed out. A cool little side note is that the developer Mercury's team, that works side by side with Nintendo, originally pitched Nintendo their idea for a Metroid Fusion remake. Nintendo turned them down, but the Metroid series creator, Yoshio Sakamoto, was so impressed with their admiration for the series that Nintendo hired them back to work on this game instead. That is literally a dream come true for any small developer, and that is really awesome on Nintendo's part to give them a second chance.